Loyalty is a virtue. We're taught that from a young age, right? Whether it's about standing by our friends, sticking with our family through thick and thin, or even holding tight to a job we've long outgrown, loyalty is supposed to be a badge of honor. We admire it, we celebrate it, and we associate it with moral character. But what happens when loyalty becomes a trap? What happens when we confuse loyalty with fear, self-betrayal, or shame? We don't talk enough about how loyalty can become a form of self-sabotage. And that's the problem. We've been conditioned to think that being loyal, no matter the cost, is always the right thing to do. The truth is, it's not. There are moments in life when the most courageous thing we can do is stop being loyal. Not because we don't care, not because we're selfish or ungrateful, but because loyalty unchecked can turn into something toxic, something that slowly erodes who we are. So today I want to talk about why we need to rethink loyalty, why it's essential to stop being loyal when that loyalty is keeping you stuck, small, or invisible. And most importantly, how breaking free from misplaced loyalty can be an act of profound courage, an act of self-compassion, and ultimately an act of reclaiming your own worth. When we think about loyalty, we often think of it in terms of relationships, personal, professional, and even social. We remain loyal to people because we feel obligated. We stay loyal to jobs or institutions because we believe that's what's expected of us. But what happens when that loyalty starts to cost us more than we can afford? Let's start with relationships. Maybe you've had a friend for years, someone you've grown up with, shared memories with, and who has been by your side through life's ups and downs. There's history there, a deep connection that's hard to let go of. But what if that friend has changed? What if over time they become someone who drains you, someone who no longer uplifts you or respects you? Maybe they've started to criticize you subtly in ways that leave you questioning your own worth. But because of your history, because of your loyalty, you stick around, you keep giving, you keep showing up. And every time you do, a little part of you gets smaller, quieter. You tell yourself you're just being loyal. But what's really happening is that you're abandoning yourself. We stay loyal to people even when it hurts because we fear the alternative. We fear being seen as disloyal, as selfish, or as the person who walked away. But here's the thing, loyalty should never come at the expense of your own dignity, your own well-being. When we continue to show loyalty in the face of emotional abuse, manipulation, or even just plain neglect, we're not being loyal, we're being complicit in our own suffering. This is where loyalty turns into self-betrayal. We begin to prioritize someone else's comfort over our own needs. We start to make excuses for their behavior, telling ourselves that we're the problem, that we're too sensitive, or that we're asking for too much. And this is where the cycle of shame begins. We convince ourselves that we're somehow unworthy of the kind of respect, care, and reciprocity that we give to others. And in doing so, we perpetuate a lie that our worth is contingent on how loyal we are, even when that loyalty is killing us inside. Now, let's talk about loyalty in the context of our professional lives. Many of us stay in jobs that no longer serve us. Not because we're passionate about the work or because we feel truly valued, but because we feel loyal to the company, the team, or even just the paycheck. We tell ourselves that we should be grateful for the opportunity, that we should stick it out because leaving would make us seem ungrateful or, worse, a quitter. But here's the hard truth: companies are not loyal to us. They are loyal to their bottom line, their shareholders, and their own survival. And that's not a moral failing on their part. It's just the nature of business. But when we start to place our loyalty in a company, an organization, or an institution, we often do so at the expense of our own growth and happiness. How many of us have stayed in a job long past the point where we knew it was no longer aligned with our values? How many of us have ignored the signs that we're being undervalued, underpaid, or overworked because we felt a sense of duty to remain loyal? We tell ourselves that we owe it to the company, to our boss, or to our colleagues to stay. But what about what we owe to ourselves? When we stop being loyal to an organization that no longer values us, we make room for something better. We create space for opportunities that align with who we are and where we want to go. We stop settling for less than we deserve, and we start demanding more from our professional lives. This is not selfishness, it's self-respect. And it's a form of courage that is often misunderstood in a culture that glorifies hustle and grind. So why do we stay loyal even when it's hurting us? The answer is simple: fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being alone. Fear of being judged. Fear of the unknown. We stay loyal because it feels safer than the alternative. It's easier to cling to what we know, even if it's hurting us, than to let go and face the uncertainty of what might come next. But here's the thing about fear: it lies to us. It tells us that we're not strong enough to stand on our own, that we're not worthy of something better. It tells us that if we let go of that toxic relationship, that unfulfilling job, or that damaging loyalty, we'll be left with nothing. But that's not true. Yeah. The moment we stop being loyal to what no longer serves us, we make space for what does. We create room in our lives for the kind of relationships, work, and experiences that nourish us, that uplift us, that reflect our true worth. But that can only happen when we stop letting fear dictate our decisions and start trusting in our own strength, resilience, and deservingness. One of the most dangerous forms of loyalty is the loyalty we show to our own suffering. We become so accustomed to living in pain, in disappointment, or in self-doubt that it becomes our default state. We start to believe that this is just how life is supposed to be, that struggle is a permanent condition, rather than a temporary experience. We become loyal to our stories of inadequacy. We become loyal to the narratives that tell us we're not good enough, not smart enough, not deserving enough. And in doing so, we trap ourselves in a cycle of shame and unworthiness. We convince ourselves that if we just stay loyal to the struggle, if we just keep pushing through, we'll eventually be rewarded with happiness or success. But happiness and success don't come from staying loyal to our suffering. They come from breaking free from it. They come from recognizing that we are worthy of joy, of love, of fulfillment, not because we've earned it through struggle, but because it is our birthright as human beings. What if, instead of being loyal to others at the expense of ourselves, we chose to be loyal to our own growth, our own healing, and our own happiness? What if we prioritized our own needs, our own boundaries, and our own dreams? What if we stopped seeing loyalty as an obligation to others and started seeing it as a commitment to ourselves? Loyalty to ourselves means setting boundaries with the people who take more than they give. It means walking away from relationships, jobs, or situations that no longer serve our highest good. It means trusting that we are worthy of more than what we've been settling for. And most importantly, it means giving ourselves permission to change, to grow, and to let go of the things that are holding us back. This kind of loyalty is not easy. It requires us to confront our fears, to disappoint others, and to risk being judged. But it is also the most profound act of courage we can undertake. Because when we choose loyalty to ourselves, we are choosing to honor our own worth. We are choosing to live in alignment with our values, our desires, and our truth. And that is where true freedom lies. One of the most insidious ways that loyalty traps us is through the weight of other people's expectations. We grow up learning that it's important to be reliable, to be consistent, and to meet the expectations of those around us. Whether it's family, friends, or colleagues, the pressure to be who others want us to be often becomes an invisible burden we carry for years, sometimes without even realizing it. But let me ask you this: how often do we stop to question those expectations? How often do we pause to ask ourselves if the roles we're playing and the personas we're maintaining are truly aligned with who we are? Too often, we become loyal to the expectations placed upon us, even when those expectations suffocate our true selves. This happens in families all the time. Maybe you grew up in a household where loyalty to family was everything, where you were expected to follow a certain path, make certain choices, or behave in a certain way because that's what was deemed acceptable. You might have been the responsible one, the strong one, the quiet one. And without ever questioning it, you accepted that role. You became loyal to it because that's what kept the peace. That's what maintained the approval of those you loved. But what happens when that loyalty becomes a prison? What happens when you realize that the expectations you've been loyal to all these years don't align with your authentic self? We fear disappointing people. We fear the discomfort of letting them down or being seen as rebellious, selfish, or inconsiderate. But the truth is, when we stay loyal to the roles and expectations that no longer serve us, we are betraying the most important person in our lives, ourselves. And here's the kicker: the people who truly love and value us will respect us more for stepping into our authentic selves than for continuing to play a role just to make them comfortable. The courage to stop being loyal to other people's expectations requires vulnerability. It requires us to say, this is who I am. This is what I want. This is what I need. And that's terrifying because it opens us up to the possibility of rejection, criticism, or even abandonment. But the alternative, living a life that isn't truly ours, is far more painful in the long run. We don't just remain loyal to other people's expectations, we also stay loyal to outdated versions of ourselves. We cling to identities that no longer fit because we're afraid of what might happen if we let them go. Maybe you've always been known as the fixer, the person who swoops in and solves everyone's problems. Or maybe you've been the achiever, the one who gets things done and makes it all look easy. These identities become so ingrained in us that we start to believe they define us. But what happens when that identity no longer serves you? What happens when it starts to feel like a straitjacket instead of a source of pride? We become loyal to these identities because they're comfortable. They give us a sense of control, a sense of predictability. But just because something is familiar doesn't mean it's healthy. Just because an identity has served us in the past doesn't mean it's meant to serve us forever. It's scary to think about letting go of an old identity because it often feels like we're losing a part of ourselves. But in reality, we're not losing anything, we're evolving. We're shedding the layers that no longer fit so that we can step into something new, something truer to who we are now. And that requires us to stop being loyal to who we were and start being loyal to who we're becoming. The process of letting go of old identities is not easy. It's messy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright painful. But it's also necessary. Because staying loyal to an outdated version of yourself is like trying to wear clothes that no longer fit. They might have looked great once, but now they're just constricting, uncomfortable, and holding you back. One of the most common reasons we stay loyal to people, jobs, or situations that no longer serve us is guilt. We feel guilty about walking away, guilty about prioritizing ourselves, and guilty about the impact our choices might have on others. We tell ourselves that it's selfish to stop being loyal, that we owe it to the other person or the institution to stay. But guilt is a powerful manipulator. It keeps us stuck in places we don't belong. It convinces us that our value is tied to how much we sacrifice for others, even when that sacrifice is slowly eroding our own sense of self-worth. I want to be clear here, loyalty should never be driven by guilt. True loyalty is a choice, not an obligation. It's something we offer freely, not because we feel guilty, but because we genuinely want to show up for the people and things that matter to us. When loyalty is driven by guilt, it becomes a form of emotional manipulation, whether that manipulation is coming from others or from within ourselves. Let's talk about the difference between guilt and responsibility. Guilt says, if I walk away, I'm a bad person. I'm hurting them. I'm letting them down. Responsibility says, I care about this person or situation, but I also have a responsibility to take care of myself. I can't pour from an empty cup. Guilt tells us that we're responsible for other people's happiness, but responsibility reminds us that we're only responsible for our own actions, our own boundaries, and our own well-being. When we start to recognize the ways in which guilt is keeping us loyal to the wrong things, we can begin to disentangle ourselves from that emotional trap. We can start to make decisions from a place of clarity and self-respect rather than from a place of fear and obligation. Boundaries are the antidote to misplaced loyalty. They are the lines we draw to protect our time, energy, and emotional well-being. But for so many of us, boundaries feel uncomfortable. They feel like rejection or abandonment. We worry that setting boundaries will make us seem cold, distant, or uncaring. But boundaries are not about pushing people away. They're about creating space for ourselves. They're about saying, I matter too. My needs, my feelings, and my well-being are just as important as anyone else's. And when we can do that, we start to reclaim the parts of ourselves that we've been giving away in the name of loyalty. Here's the thing about boundaries. They are not just about saying no to others. They are also about saying yes to ourselves. They are about giving ourselves permission to step back from relationships, jobs, or obligations that drain us and redirect that energy toward things that nourish us. When we don't set boundaries, we become resentful. We start to feel like we're constantly giving and never receiving, like we're being taken advantage of. And that's where loyalty starts to feel like a trap. But when we set clear, healthy boundaries, we create a foundation of mutual respect. We show others how we expect to be treated, and we give ourselves the freedom to walk away when those boundaries are not respected. What would it look like to be loyal to our own potential? To be fiercely committed to our growth, our dreams, and our desires. So often we think of loyalty in terms of being there for others, but we rarely think about what it means to be there for ourselves. We put our dreams on hold because we're busy being loyal to everyone else's needs and expectations. But what if we flipped that script? What if we decided that our primary loyalty is to ourselves and our potential? When we are loyal to our potential, we stop settling for less than we deserve. We stop saying yes to opportunities, relationships, or situations that keep us small or stagnant. We start to trust that we are capable of more than we've been told, and we begin to take the necessary risks to move toward that potential. This kind of loyalty requires us to be brave. It requires us to confront the stories we've been telling ourselves about what we can and cannot do. It requires us to challenge the limiting beliefs that have kept us playing small for so long. And most importantly, it requires us to stop waiting for permission from others to pursue our own greatness. Being loyal to our potential means making decisions that might not make sense to others. It means walking away from what is comfortable or familiar because we know that staying in that place will prevent us from growing. It means trusting ourselves enough to take the leap, even when the path ahead is uncertain. At the core of all of this, the ability to stop being loyal when it no longer serves us is self-trust. It's trusting that we know what's best for us, even when others might disagree. It's trusting that we are capable of making decisions that honor our values, our needs, and our desires. And it's trusting that no matter what happens, we will be okay. But self-trust doesn't come easily. It's something we have to cultivate, especially if we've spent years putting other people's needs ahead of our own. We have to learn to listen to that inner voice that tells us when something isn't right, even if it's scary or uncomfortable to act on it. Self-trust is the foundation of healthy loyalty. When we trust ourselves, we can be loyal to others in ways that are healthy and balanced. We can show up for the people we care about without losing ourselves in the process. We can stay committed to our work, our relationships, and our goals without sacrificing our own well-being. But when we lack self-trust, loyalty becomes a way of avoiding our own discomfort. We stay loyal to things that don't serve us because we don't trust ourselves to handle the fallout of walking away. We stay loyal to people who mistreat us because we don't trust ourselves to be okay on our own. We stay loyal to outdated identities because we don't trust ourselves to navigate the uncertainty of change. Building self-trust takes time. It requires us to start small, to make decisions that align with our values, and then watch how those decisions unfold. It requires us to be kind to ourselves when we make mistakes and to remind ourselves that mistakes are not a reflection of our worth. And it requires us to practice listening to our own needs, even when it feels uncomfortable. Letting go of misplaced loyalty is one of the hardest things we will ever do. It requires us to confront our fears, our guilt, and our deeply ingrained beliefs about what it means to be a good person. It requires us to disappoint people, to walk away from situations that no longer serve us, and to risk being judged by others. But letting go is also one of the most liberating things we can do. It frees us from the chains of obligation, expectation, and guilt. It allows us to step into a life that is truly ours, a life that is aligned with our values, our desires, and our potential. When we stop being loyal to the wrong things, we create space for the right things to enter our lives. We create space for relationships that uplift us, for work that fulfills us, and for experiences that nourish our souls. We create space for our own growth, healing, and happiness. So the next time you find yourself questioning whether you should remain loyal to something or someone, ask yourself, is this loyalty serving me, or is it holding me back? Is this loyalty a reflection of my values, or is it a form of self-betrayal? And most importantly, am I being loyal to myself in this situation? Because at the end of the day, the most important loyalty we can have is to ourselves. And when we can cultivate that kind of loyalty, we become unstoppable. Let's take a moment to talk about one of the biggest fears we face when we even think about stepping away from our misplaced loyalties, the fear of abandonment. There's this cultural narrative that paints leaving something, whether it's a person, a job, or a situation, as an act of betrayal. We equate it with abandonment, with failure. But I want to challenge that narrative because in most cases, stopping misplaced loyalty isn't about abandoning others, it's about not abandoning ourselves. The fear of being perceived as disloyal or as a quitter can keep us locked in situations that no longer align with our values or desires. But abandoning a toxic relationship, an unfulfilling job, or an outdated identity doesn't make us bad people. It makes us brave. It means we are choosing to stand up for ourselves, to honor our own boundaries, and to protect our mental and emotional well-being. We must learn to see that walking away from something that harms us is not the same as giving up on something good. Sometimes leaving is the most loyal thing we can do for ourselves. And here's where it gets tricky. We're often told that loyalty is about sacrifice, about sticking it out no matter how hard things get. But what if loyalty in its truest form isn't about endless sacrifice? What if it's about knowing when to let go? What if real loyalty requires us to listen to our own needs, even when doing so makes us feel uncomfortable? We need to shift the way we understand loyalty. It's not about blind allegiance or enduring hardship for the sake of appearances. Loyalty at its core is about commitment. It's about committing to relationships, jobs, or situations that allow us to thrive. And when those things no longer serve us, when they start to harm us, real loyalty means having the courage to walk away. Think about it this way: when we stay in toxic environments out of a misplaced sense of loyalty, we're not just hurting ourselves, we're also allowing the other party to continue their harmful behaviors unchecked. Sometimes the act of walking away can be a wake-up call for others. It forces them to confront their own actions, and in some cases may even inspire them to change. But that's not the goal. The goal is not to change others. The goal is to honor ourselves. Guilt is a powerful emotion, and it can be one of the biggest barriers to breaking free from misplaced loyalty. We feel guilty for even considering the idea of leaving. We worry about what others will think, how they'll react, and whether they'll be hurt. But here's the thing about guilt. It's often rooted in a false sense of responsibility. We take on the weight of other people's happiness as if it's our job to ensure their well-being. But that's not our job. Our job is to take care of ourselves, to honor our own needs, and to live in alignment with our values. We have to stop confusing guilt with responsibility. Feeling guilty for prioritizing ourselves doesn't mean we're doing something wrong. It just means we've been conditioned to believe that self-care is selfish, that taking care of our own needs comes at the expense of others. But that's not true. In fact, when we take care of ourselves, we're better able to show up for the people and things that truly matter to us. When we stop pouring energy into relationships or situations that drain us, we create more space for the things that fill us up. It's important to recognize that guilt is often a signal that we're growing. When we start to make decisions that honor our own needs, we're breaking free from old patterns of behavior patterns that may have kept us stuck for years. And breaking free from those patterns can feel uncomfortable. It can feel like we're doing something wrong because we're stepping outside of what's familiar. But growth is supposed to feel uncomfortable. It's supposed to challenge us, to push us beyond our comfort zones. That's how we know we're moving in the right direction. So when guilt creeps in, I want you to remember this: you deserve better. You deserve relationships that nurture you, jobs that fulfill you, and experiences that bring you joy. You deserve to live a life that reflects your values and desires, not one that's dictated by guilt or obligation. And that's not selfish, it's self-respect. One of the reasons we stay loyal to things that no longer serve us is because letting go requires us to be vulnerable. It requires us to admit that something isn't working, that we're not happy, and that we want something different. And that's hard. It's hard to be vulnerable, especially when we've been taught to equate vulnerability with weakness. But vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a strength. It takes incredible courage to admit that we need something to change. It takes strength to stand up and say, this isn't right for me anymore. And it takes even more courage to act on that realization, to take the steps necessary to free ourselves from what's no longer serving us. Vulnerability is at the heart of personal growth. It's what allows us to connect with ourselves on a deeper level, to understand our own needs, and to take action that aligns with those needs. When we're vulnerable, we're open to the possibility of change, even when that change is scary. And here's the thing: vulnerability is not about having all the answers or knowing exactly what comes next. It's about being willing to take the first step, even when the path ahead is unclear. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we create space for transformation. We open ourselves up to the possibility of something new, something better. And that's where the magic happens. That's where we start to see the shifts in our lives that we've been longing for. But it all starts with vulnerability. It starts with admitting that we need to let go of what's no longer serving us and having the courage to take that leap. We need to start thinking about loyalty as a choice, not an obligation. Too often, we treat loyalty as something that's owed to others, something we're bound to regardless of how it makes us feel. But loyalty should be something we give freely, not because we feel we have to, but because we genuinely want to. When we think about loyalty as a choice, it becomes empowering. It means that we get to decide where we invest our time, energy, and love. We get to choose who and what we're loyal to, based on whether those things align with our values, our needs, and our desires. And most importantly, we get to change our minds when those things no longer serve us. Loyalty should never be about obligation or guilt. It should never be about staying in situations that harm us or drain us. True loyalty is about mutual respect, about showing up for the people and things that matter to us in ways that honor both them and ourselves. And sometimes the most loyal thing we can do is walk away, because staying in a situation that no longer serves us doesn't just hurt us, it hurts everyone involved. We need to reclaim the idea of loyalty as something that's grounded in choice, not in obligation. Because when loyalty is a choice, it becomes a reflection of our values. It becomes something that empowers us rather than something that keeps us stuck. One of the biggest barriers to letting go of misplaced loyalty is the fear of judgment. We worry about what others will think if we walk away. We fear being labeled as disloyal, selfish, or ungrateful. But here's the truth: people will always have opinions about our choices. No matter what we do, there will always be someone who disapproves or thinks we're making the wrong decision. And if we spend our lives trying to please everyone else, we'll end up living a life that isn't truly ours. The fear of judgment can keep us trapped in relationships, jobs, and situations that no longer serve us. It can make us second guess our own needs and desires, convincing us that what we want doesn't matter as much as what others expect from us. But the reality is, we can't control what others think of us. We can't control how they'll react when we make decisions that prioritize our own well-being. What we can control is how we show up for ourselves, how we honor our own needs, and how we choose to live in alignment with our values. It's important to remember that the people who truly care about us will support our decisions, even if they don't fully understand them. The people who love us will respect our boundaries, even if those boundaries challenge the status quo. And if someone judges us for prioritizing our own well-being, that judgment says more about them than it does about us. We need to stop letting the fear of judgment dictate our choices. Because at the end of the day, the only person who has to live with the consequences of our decisions is us. We are the ones who have to live with the weight of misplaced loyalty, with the resentment that comes from staying in situations that don't serve us. And we are the ones who will experience the freedom and joy that comes from letting go of what's no longer aligned with who we are. Change is inevitable. It's a part of life. Yet so often we resist it. We hold on to what's familiar, even when it no longer serves us, because change feels too uncertain, too risky. But here's the thing staying the same: holding on to things that no longer serve us is far riskier than embracing change. When we stay loyal to situations, relationships, or jobs that no longer align with who we are, we're not just staying stagnant, we're actively stunting our growth. We're denying ourselves the opportunity to evolve, to learn, and to experience new things. Embracing change, on the other hand, is a radical act of self-loyalty. It's a way of saying, I trust myself enough to take this leap. I believe that I deserve better, and I'm willing to make the changes necessary to create that better life. Change is uncomfortable, yes, but discomfort is where growth happens. It's where we stretch beyond our current limitations and step into our full potential. And when we stop being loyal to the things that no longer serve us, we create space for that growth. We create space for new opportunities, new relationships, and new experiences that align with who we truly are. The more we embrace change as a form of loyalty to ourselves, the more we'll start to see the beauty in it. Change doesn't have to be something we fear. It can be something we welcome with open arms. It can be a sign that we're growing, evolving, and moving closer to the life we truly want.